Welcome, everyone, to our conversation series. I'm Becca Mowrey, and if you didn't know, I am here with the wonderful and amazing Graham Kendrick. Graham has been an incredible gift to our Walnut Hill community family, and he's been here many times in the past doing concerts and leading worship and bringing great words to our church. And Graham, we are just thrilled and honored to have you here today. So thank you so much for making this time work. And it's got to be a crazy season for you, right? Because we're in this COVID season, and it's a worldwide epidemic, which is unusual. It's first in my lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Yeah,
it's
and
crazy. It's changing so many things.
Yes,
isn't it? And I think more than we realize. You know,
yes.
it's like a seismic shift.
Yeah.
In around the world, and relationships between nations and and the church. You know. Everything's changing, yeah.
Everything's changing. Everything's changing. And hopefully our elders actually brought a word to our church at the beginning of this season that this could be the church's finest hour. And we've really seen, because we've been forced into certain changes, we've really just released it into the hands of the Lord and seen him do amazing things. Even before this recorded conversation, I know you and I were chatting about church being online, and our church is completely online, and we've seen people healed through prayer, just like typing our prayer chats, and just incredible things, you know, that are just outside the box of how we've normally operated. And so I know you as a musician, your whole life must be turned upside down right now. Can you give us just a little glimpse into your life in this COVID season?
Well, I guess the biggest thing is that all the traveling, you know, has just suddenly gone. You know, and you start off beginning of the year, you think, okay, this is going to be 3 months, and then it's 6 months, and then you think, I don't think I'm going to be traveling, you know, to the end of the year or beyond, you know. And that's a big change because that's been my life, you know, for forever, since I was, you know, in my early 20s.
So just about 10 years then, right? 10, 20 years.
Yeah, 25 maybe.
20 years.
But at the same time, there have always been periods where I've been at home. So it's, you know, go away, come home. And during that time, I have the other side of my life, you know, which is, I guess, there's a lot of the usual admin and housekeeping stuff and family. There's also the creative side. So it means I've got no excuse left for not having time to write songs, you know. It is, yeah, we all like that. We say, you know, I think we are anyway. We say, if I only had time, you know, and then suddenly, for some people, not everybody, of course, you know, you suddenly have got time. But I have been trying to finish off songs, because I mean, starting songs is relatively easy for a songwriter, but finishing them is quite hard. So one of the songs, this is an example, years ago, I picked out a hymn text, and it was an English hymn text, but originally translated from the Latin. So it's called Veni Creator Spiritus, Creator Spirit. And it's quite an established hymn, but it's not sung very much. So I thought, well, I'll try to put a new tune to it, maybe write a chorus, like, you know, like so many people do. And I think it's a great thing to do that when old hymns are renewed. You know, like Cornerstone has become a very big song in the church. It's at least a 300-year-old hymn, basically, but we're singing it again.
Wow.
And, you know, sometimes those old hymns, they have an angle, a spirituality, a language that we don't use now, but we need it. You know, the church is made up of every generation of believer that's ever lived, you know.
Yes.
And each generation has treasures. And some of those treasures we can carry into the present, you know, with particularly with songs and prayers. So that's what I did. And recorded it remotely. So I had a friend who has a studio, and I sent him an outline. He put the track together, and I sang my vocal. I got somebody else in our church to sing another part of the vocal. Anyway, we put it together, and launched it on my website for Pentecost, because Pentecost is all about the Holy Spirit.
Oh my goodness. So that, like, the whole experience from, just being at home, having the new rhythm, and then recording, like all of it from.
Yeah, and you see, I think one of the good things about this lockdown is that I think we're a lot more relaxed about things. So normally, a new song, I will wait till the next album, and go into studio and maybe these days Visio is as well. But because it's lockdown, a lot of people are appearing in informal guises, aren't they, in their homes, in their living rooms, and it kind of sets you free to do things a little bit more spontaneously.
Yes.
And also everyone recognizes that there's maybe, although this particular track I think is done very professionally, but sometimes you're willing to do things a bit quicker, and a bit more spontaneously than you would otherwise. So
yeah, I love what you said too about it being like this kind of casual atmosphere. I was actually talking to one of my sisters who's an executive, and she was saying how wonderful sometimes these Zoom meetings have been, because, the president of the company, they're hosting these meetings, and like their little kid comes in and sits on a lap, and, you see each other in their houses. Like, we're both in our homes right now, right?
Yeah.
And these meetings and kind of this virtual world that we've moved to, you get an insight into people's lives, like just the casual attire and, the mess in the back of the kitchen, and the kids screaming in downstairs, the workers in the house, building shelves. And it is kind of a fun glimpse into people's lives that you would never have without this. So as impersonal, sometimes I think, as this might seem, the whole digital thing, there is a bit of an insight that you get into people's lives, which I really, really love.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
it's wonderful. Well, I know that you said that there's been some unique stuff going on in this season with it. You had mentioned about a fundraiser that was coming up with the London Marathon. Can you tell us a little bit about this kind of new quirky adventure that you've been on?
Back in March, it must have been, there's an annual marathon run in London, the London Marathon. And it's a major fundraising event. People dress up, as well as the professional runners, the world athletes. A lot of people would like dress up in a clown costume or a rabbit costume, and they run and they raise millions of pounds. So the marathon organizers had a brilliant idea. They said, well, fundraise at home. This is your marathon challenge. Do whatever you can to fundraise at home. And with that in mind, I made some inquiries about our local food bank, and discovered that they are, like many food banks, seeing like an 80% rise in applications. People just really struggling economically. So I thought, well, what could I do apart from make a donation? And I thought the obvious, I'm a songwriter, could I write a song? And there's no guarantee that, you're ever going to come up with a great song or whatever. You just have to have a go.
Yeah.
But as I thought about it one Sunday afternoon, an idea surfaced, an unfinished idea from a few years ago, which I often do this. I put down a little scrap of an idea. And this little scrap went, a little bit of love goes a long, long way, a little love. And I thought, that's good. That just fits, because it's doesn't need to be a kind of a full gospel song. It's just a little something that anybody could sing, whether they have any religious affiliations or not. But so anyway, I finished the song, and to cut a long story short, within a few days, a friend of mine had arranged it, put it on a choir website that he runs, and it was just shooting out there. People were down. We made it a free download, and thousands of people were downloading this song. And then we started to get back, reports of people raising money through this simple song. So that was different for me.
And can we hear this song? Where can we hear this song?
Okay.
Is it on YouTube or your website or anything?
Yeah, YouTube. Okay. There's a lot of songs called A Little Bit of Love, but this is the only one by Graham Kendrick.
Okay.
Otherwise, to be more certain, you can go on my YouTube channel and on my website, which is grahamkendrick.co.uk, or probably you'll pop up a link.
Yes, we
on
can
this.
put a link in the chat below.
Yeah. And there's a couple of versions there, but we'd also did a virtual choir, where everyone appears in these boxes,
Wow.
version. So, and it's a lot of fun. It's actually very, it puts a smile on your face, which I
Yeah.
think is what a lot of people need at
Yeah.
this time.
Well, and I love that you took, this gift that the Lord has and this call in your life to be a songwriter and a worship leader, and you've been able to adapt that in this season. And, just kind of in that same vein and that same theme, right now as a church, we're having to worship outside the walls. We're having to do things different. And what could you give, maybe a word of the church, or just a word of encouragement or some advice to help people really engage in worship in their homes, and not just singing? What does it look like to kind of dive deep and do what you did? You kind of took the way you used to do things and changed them a little bit, and look what the Lord did. He raised money for a food pantry. That's wonderful. So how could you encourage us outside the walls of the church to really dig into worship in this season?
I think one of the features of the way many churches have done worship for a long time now is that we, in an attempt to be really attractive and professional, we put on a great show. Okay, now that's great. The downside of that is that people can feel it's all being done for them, So we go to church and we are taken into an experience of worship, and that's fantastic. But I often speak to worship leaders, and sometimes I've posed this question. This is pre-COVID-19. I often say to worship leaders, what if your job was not primarily, what if number one on your priority list was not leading worship on Sunday? What if number one on your priority list was trying to teach people to be self-starter worshipers, to worship in their own private worlds, to establish a kind of a secret worship life, that goes on whatever else is happening around you.
Yeah.
And I think inadvertently, in church, we can tend to create what I call an event dependence.
Yes.
We have to have our fix by coming together. Now, coming together as church is absolutely amazing and brilliant, and we need community. But in these circumstances, it's even more important that we try to establish a personal worship life that is our foundation. And the rest then just becomes a wonderful icing on the cake, if you like. The building on top of the foundation.
I love that. I love that you said that. We're going to, just because we always talk to the church even about going deeper in the Word of God, and Sunday should not be the only place that you're being fed and that you're studying the Word of God. Worship shouldn't be either. That's right. That's great. That's really great, Graham.
But I think there are, the question then is, how do you do it? And when do you do it? And that actually can be harder than it seems, because life itself tends to militate against us having time, quiet time, especially if you've got a family, you've got lots of responsibilities, you're being pulled at always. So I think it's not easy. At times in my life, particularly when my children were young, the only way I could have that private time was I get up early and I go for a walk before the house, got noisy. So, and be back in time, to do my part. But just to take, 30, 40 minutes for a walk and pray, that really sustained me during that time. And I tried to build that, make a habit of that. So that there was always a space that I took. And the great thing about walking and praying is that you can't fall asleep on the spot. You fall over. So I think you need to find, a time and a space and do it first. Because if you don't do it first, something else will certainly come along.
Absolutely.
take up your
It
time and
always does.
attention.
It always
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, don't expect it to be easy, because some of us are addicted to activity and stimulation and our phones and we really struggle with being alone, let alone alone and talking to God, you know. And I think one of the first challenges is to actually be able to quieten ourselves enough to actually hear from God, you know, or at least to unload. Sometimes it's good just to write down some of the things when these annoying things come to mind.
Yes.
Remember someone saying you sit down to pray and the wild animals start to
Yes.
creep out of the jungle.
It's so true. Yeah.
But one thing you can do is just write down those things and leave them on the list. Say, right, I'll deal with that later.
Yes.
Just so they're not nagging at you. You've made them up, but you're focused. Another thing I'd say is I think the great gift of God for these times is actually the Psalms.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And they always were actually for the church historically.
Yes.
Every serious Christian would, use the Psalms in their personal devotions. Now, we all go to Psalms, at certain times. Often it's just kind of emergency times, desperation times. There's a Psalm which really helps me and I'm desperate.
Yeah.
But I think we need a routine of the Psalms. And I think if we can simply learn how to pray the Psalms, and that actually is in essence quite simple. You know? To take a Psalm, I mean, obviously there's so many different kinds of Psalms, but there's plenty that you can just open up and just a line.
Yeah.
And you can pause and you can just make your own prayer as stirred and stimulated by that Psalm. And then you read a bit further and you pray a little bit more,
Yes.
And what I find is that it takes me into a whole different world. If I just pray my own prayers, they're usually the things that are worrying me, and I just go round and round, and they're good things to pray about, but I can get stuck in the repetition of anxieties,
Oh, yes. I find that the busyness and the problems and the worries sometimes blind us from being able to even think about the goodness of God, the greatness of God, his attributes. As I read through the Psalm, one of my habits is I start my study every morning with the Psalm, and then I'll go into something else. But I find, especially some of these Psalms like 78, Psalm 118, they're pages and pages and pages long. And I've thought, man, the writer of these Psalms, mostly David usually, but they had an unending list of God's goodness, an unending list of gratitude and his magnitude. And I want that kind of heart. I want that heart where it's just a continual outpouring. Like the pages cannot contain, my gratitude and my love and my experience of the greatness of God. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think the Psalms, I think of them like an elevator, you instead of climbing up the stairs, you're stepping into an elevator and it lifts you up to a different level, and it makes you pray into concepts that might not normally have come to mind. And you get into the bigness of God. That's the great thing about the Psalms, that they start where we are. So many of the Psalms, they start in the middle of trouble. And by the time the end of the Psalm, you're in this whole God space where you're thinking about how big God is, and then suddenly the troubles have just shrunk by comparison.
And your faith grows, and your faith is swelled. I love that. Tozer, the A.W. Tozer, in his book, The Pursuit of God, talks about faith and how he said faith, it's like an eyeball, ever seeing outward and never seeing itself. And I feel like sometimes when we're very self-focused, it's I find my faith shrinking, and it's when I'm outward focused on what God is doing, it's like your faith grows, and that's what the Psalms can work toward. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So I hear you talking about intentionality. I mean, getting out and walking, even when, I mean,
Yes.
you have four girls. You're there. You're right there where I am right now. And intentionality and really mining
Yeah.
through, seldom the gold, I often say, is laying on the surface. You have to really go after it and want
That's
it.
right.
Yeah,
And a
that's good.
place, if possible,
Mm,
a place where you pray.
yes.
And I remember in busy family time, particularly when the kids were younger, I used to, as well as walking, I'd sometimes, if I wanted to study the Bible, I'd just drive a little way, park somewhere quiet, and then I could have my own, in my vehicle, I could,
Mm-hmm.
open the Bible and so on.
Yes.
And it's interesting that actually Jesus spoke a lot about secret worship life,
Mm-hmm.
in Matthew 6, when he talked about, he was teaching his disciples, and he was saying, don't be like those Pharisees. They like to pray out in public and show off their spirituality. When you pray, go into, and it talks about a closet,
Yeah.
and actually I was reading the other day that Jesus was referring to a storeroom, because about the only private place in a Middle Eastern house was a little storeroom, you know?
Yeah.
So you can imagine this Middle Eastern disciple of Jesus finding their way into this
Yes.
storeroom over the bags and the jars and everything,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
just shutting the door
Yeah.
and praying,
Fighting
and
for quiet time. Yeah.
that's right, and developing. And he said, pray in secret, or give in secret, fast secretly,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that idea of developing a secret worship life
Mm.
I find a very helpful idea, you know, and a good one to pursue during lockdown, when maybe we have more opportunity,
Yeah.
because we all go to a secret place in our lives, don't
Mm.
we? Uh, Sometimes it's our pain we feel, or it's just an escape, or there can be good secret places, good times, or there can be bad times. But if we can develop that secret place into a place with God,
Yes.
where we pour out just the reality of who we are, it's easy to feel we've actually got to put on a great show before God. But
Mm.
this is exactly the place where I think God wants us to pour out our hearts
Mm-hmm.
exactly as we are, in
Yeah.
complete honesty, because there's grace. There's grace for
Mm.
exactly who we are and exactly what we're feeling. And the reality of God's love, we can meet Him in His acceptance of us,
Mm-hmm.
um, and in that sort of honest openness.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the more it becomes a habit in our lives and we experience the touch of the Lord, the more our response, we're going to hunger for it. We're going to want more of it. It's kind of
yeah,
like chocolate cake or Doritos. The
yes.
more you take in, you just can't stop.
Yes.
So that's how Jesus is. The more of his, the more I experience of him, the more I just deeply desire him.
Yeah,
I
amen,
know when you
amen.
were here several years ago, you talked about a rhythm in your life that I've never forgotten. And you talked about how you take a day a week and you fast and pray. And at the time, I had four little kids, and that was, almost an impossibility for me. I can't take a day
I
away
understand
and just
that.
fast and pray. But, I think for a lot of people, the idea of something like that does seem a little bit overwhelming. But can you talk just a little bit maybe about what that experience has kind of done in your life to encourage us, and then maybe how would we get started in something like that? I know you already touched on it, like we need to be intentional. You get out for a walk, find a place to pray.
Mm.
Can you give us maybe just a story from inspiration from you in that, and then maybe some practical tools to get us going in that?
Yeah. No, well, I fully appreciate it. It's just not accessible, possible for many folks. I think the key is to start small and let it grow. You
Yep.
know, I think if you leap straight into a whole, hours and hours, um, you probably give up because you just think I can't do this.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
start small and then build up. And it may be that you look at your life and you think, well, it's going to be 10 years till I can really shut off a whole day for that. Fine, build up towards that
Mm.
10 years,
Mm-hmm.
and try to organize your life, and have a look at what could I not be doing? What could I miss out? What could I
Yes.
cut out of my life that would give me an extra 30 minutes, or, an extra 10 minutes, or an extra hour, or
Yes.
whatever. But, and I didn't start that until, my kids were grown up and
Mm.
so on. And I had much more opportunity. But the other thing about it was that I needed a pattern. And I think pretty much simultaneous with that, I began to get into the Psalms, as I was just
Yes.
explaining, but in a
Yeah.
deeper way. And, we need routines.
Yep.
Um, and sometimes those routines can seem a bit dry and repetitive. But when you look back to the saints of old, it's the common experience,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I know some of the Eastern Church fathers would talk about, this is like your daily manna,
Yes.
And although manna was a miracle, it was pretty boring,
Mm-hmm.
What's for breakfast, Mum, out there in the wilderness?
Mm-hmm.
Manna, Is it going to be fried or boiled today?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
40 years of the same stuff
Right.
every day, but it sustained their lives. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's an element of recognizing that. And um, I still struggle with it.
Mm.
I can't say that it's become suddenly just
Yeah.
easy.
No.
It continues to be a struggle, and some days I do better than others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's better to do it poorly than not at all, because the
Yeah.
next time, perhaps it'll be a lot better.
Yes.
Um,
I think it's
and
also a good reminder too that I'm doing this as an act of worship for the Lord too. Like, Lord, I'm
yes,
doing this. I think that in our culture sometimes it becomes, like I said, very me centered, and I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel.
yeah,
Therefore, I won't pursue it. And it's like, no, press through, press in. Like,
that's
we're
it.
here for Him. We are here for you, Lord. I'm doing this
Mm.
because I want to learn more about you. Even if I don't feel it, I trust that you're doing something.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I think often it's in that struggle that we do encounter God more deeply.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
in a sense, perhaps it needs to be hard to
Mm.
prove our determination. To
Yes.
to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I've noticed is that sometimes a day, a time like that, put aside, you can end the day thinking, oh, that I really had higher expectations than actually happened.
Oh,
But then
it's
sometimes the next day
yeah.
things start to happen, and you see,
Yes.
actually, I did press in,
Yeah.
um, and my sacrifice of praise was received.
Yes.
um, and God does stuff. And equally, if on times when I've had to miss that day, which I
Mm-hmm.
try to avoid if I possibly can, but occasionally with traveling and so on, uh, I do miss it.
Mm.
I feel a little less alert and
Yes.
alive to God,
Yes.
even if it wasn't a spectacular day in God's presence. And I don't
Yeah.
have many of those. Yeah.
That's good to hear, Graham. That's good to hear. That is encouraging, though. I think sometimes, as we study and you kind of see these people that you put on pedestals as, I know heroes of faith is probably exaggerated, but, like kind of like mentors that you look to in faith, and you think every day is a mountaintop experience, and that's not it. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, I know that we're running out of time, and I know you have some other things going on, but I guess I would maybe we can leave the church with just a word of, do you have just a word of encouragement for just people to keep going in some way in worship? Yeah. Not to put you on the spot or anything, Graham.
No. Frantically trying to remember a particular scripture here.
Yeah.
From Psalm 60 something. Well, there is a lovely piece of I think it's Psalm 60 or 63, which says, pour out your hearts before God, because he is our refuge,
Oh, yeah.
And I find that's such a helpful reminder, again, not to try to present some spiritual persona before God, because he knows it all anyway, but to pour out my heart, and whatever's in there, and that's always a good starting point. Excuse me, God, but I really feel this today, but here it is, and what do I do with it? Pour it out, because God is our refuge, and taking refuge in God is so important, because if we don't, the chances are we'll take refuge in something else.
Absolutely.
We all have consolations, things that console us, It might be food, or it might be chocolate, or it might, not that a little bit of chocolate isn't okay, but we can go to those consolations, fleshly consolations.
Yes, even things that we wouldn't anticipate, maybe like criticism or despair, or
So refuse those consolations and pour out your heart before God. Make him your consolation, and press in.
What a good word. Pour out your heart. Yes. Thank you, Graham. Thank you so much for being part of this interview, and for just sharing, like being with Walnut Hill again. It's just refreshing and exciting to see you again, and send our love to Jill. We miss her, and
we will do.
Yeah, many blessings to you and your family in this season. And thanks, everyone. Thanks so much. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your week. All right. Bye, Graham.
God bless. Bye-bye.